in the dry region became shepherds. I won't go into detail, but you can see here an attempt at reconstructing the environmental history of this is of course the coast like Konkan or Goa coast here, the crest line of the hills and the Deccan Plateau. One can see how the whole pattern may have changed, and these kind of stories one can hear from some of the older kind of repositories of the lore of those groups. So essentially what is in this picture, all of it was told by one old man at a village called Saravagapur, which is a Dhangar village, one night. And in fact he had many great details of place names and so on, and how they were once together, and how today the shepherds and the buffalo keepers have the same ancestral deities in the Krishna Valley, and how then the shepherds remained in the dry tract and the buffalo herds slowly moved towards finally ended up on the sadas being pushed from below. So oral history is a very enlightening source. Another set of insights come from things like epidemiological studies. The Dhangars and their distribution, one can see that traditionally the data on incidence of malaria in the country, there are interesting documentation when the DDT was first introduced and malaria began to be wiped out, then which areas of the country were relatively free of malaria, which areas were highly malarial. The Maharashtra Western Ghats were quite free of malaria, and the Gaudi, these Dhangars, Maske Dhangars, the buffalo keepers, were earlier essentially restricted to that. In the 1950s, when the malaria eradication campaign became successful and a lot of forested tract, I do not know about Goa, we did not do any studies in Goa, but we studied in Kolhapur area and then the adjacent areas of Yellapur and so on in Uttar Kannada district and further south Shimoga, Chikmagalur. There is a clear, detailed story they tell of how they learned that there were these southern areas which were highly malarial, were no more malarial, and there was very good grazing, and all of them moved. So understanding the diseases gave us very good clues. And then finally today what the changes are happening, which we can get through a comparative study. This was done in the 1980s, so today you will get another picture. But at that time, where there was good forest cover, people kept a lot of buffaloes, few cattle and hardly any goats. And other areas where there was essentially forest cover had been destroyed, they could no longer manage to keep many buffaloes and cattle and had switched over to goats. And now my understanding is that if one looks today, you will indeed see this transition towards essentially complete dependence on goat keeping, and then now in fact a complete collapse of pastoralism, and the Dhangar, these buffalo keepers of Kolhapur area, whom I interviewed recently, they say that almost all of them are now making a living as Mathadi workers, what do you say, head loaders in Bombay docks or sellers of bananas in Bombay markets. That no more can they keep buffaloes and cattle and so on. Though only 30-40 years ago, they had large herds, and actually when I first did the field work in the late 70s, and you would go to some remote villages, they would give you very good buttermilk to drink. And they said no water. I mean, the Dhangars, the dharma is to drink buttermilk, not water. Drinking water is against our dharma. And there used to be these big earthen ranjans full of buttermilk. They have all disappeared. So in these 30 years with environmental degradation. Anyway, so this is another story. Now what I want to do today is look at the ecological history of Goa over these last 50 years, I try to use many of these various lines of evidence. As we go along, maybe I will have an opportunity to give more seminars before students of history and get your inputs. But as an evolutionary biologist, let me show you one final reconstruction of history. That in the course of evolution, you earlier had living organisms, which of course are organisms that make more copies of themselves. They are reproducers, replicators. But then humans have come up with ability to make copies of artifacts. And of course, you have all these chairs which are hundreds of copies of one particular kind of artifact. And the world is now being dominated by population of these artifacts. As the mass of life is going down, the mass of artifacts is going up. So exactly where we will end, we will have to see, but I think this is the broad sweep of history. Thank you very much.